Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going beyond the numbers and statistics, diving into the world of qualitative research in psychology.
It's really about understanding those aha moments in human behavior,
Right.
the kind we can't easily measure, but that give us a much richer picture of, why people do what they do.
And to guide us on this journey, we've got excerpts from Qualitative Research in Psychology,
Yeah.
Expanding Perspectives in Methodology and Design. It's edited by Camic, Rhodes, and Lucy Yardley.
Yes.
Plus, we'll be drawing on Michael Bamberg's foreword, which gives us a fascinating look back at the history of this whole approach.
Yeah, back in the 70s and 80s, just observing and describing human experiences was considered radical in psychology.
Right.
Can you imagine that?
Wow, yeah, it seems so obvious now that to really understand people, you have to kind of get inside their heads, not just measure their outward actions, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bamberg actually shares a story in the foreword about facing real skepticism when he first started using qualitative methods. Back then the focus was all about controlled experiments and statistics, anything that could be neatly quantified.
So how did this whole field of qualitative research gain traction? Was it like a rebellion against the number crunchers?
Yeah, kind of. Researchers started realizing that to truly understand behavior, you have to explore the meaning people attach to their experiences, their social context, the stories they tell themselves, all those rich, messy details that numbers alone can't capture.
Okay, so I get that qualitative research is about going deeper, but I think a lot of people might still assume it's just about words, while quantitative research is about numbers. Is it really that simple?
Not at all. Both approaches can actually use numbers, but the key difference is in how they're used.
Okay.
Think of it like this. If you're studying a famous painting, quantitative research might tell you the exact dimensions of the canvas, the chemical composition of the paints.
Okay.
But qualitative research helps you understand the story the artist is trying to tell, the emotions they're conveying.
Oh, so it's the difference between knowing the technical specs of a song and actually feeling what the music is trying to say?
Exactly. And just like there are different genres of music, there are different methods within qualitative research, each suited to exploring, different aspects of human experience.
Let's get into some of those methods. One that caught my eye was discourse analysis. It sounds so complex. What does it even mean?
It's actually more familiar than you might think. Discourse analysis is about looking at language in action. It's not just about what people say, but how they say it, the subtle cues that reveal their underlying intentions and meanings. Think about a job interview. It's not just the answers you give, but your tone, your body language, even those tiny pauses that can make all the difference.
So discourse analysis is like reading between the lines, picking up on those unspoken messages. It's like being a communication detective.
Exactly. And this applies to everything from everyday conversations to political speeches. It helps us understand how language can be used to persuade, manipulate, even create entire identities.
This makes me wonder if I'm missing all sorts of clues in my own interactions. We've all had those moments where we sense something's off in a conversation, but can't quite put our finger on it.
Right. And discourse analysis can give us a framework for understanding those subtle dynamics. It helps us decode the hidden messages behind the words.
Okay, so discourse analysis is all about language. What about another method mentioned in the book, narrative psychology? That sounds fascinating.
It really is. Narrative psychology explores how we use stories to make sense of our lives.
Okay.
It's about understanding that we're all constantly weaving narratives, not just when we're writing a novel, but in how we think about our past, our relationships, our future.
So it's about recognizing that we're all storytellers at heart.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the stories we tell ourselves have a powerful influence on our well-being. The book shares an example where researchers analyzed personal accounts of people with chronic pain.
Okay.
They discovered that the structure of the story people told about their pain, whether it was tragic, comedic, even romantic, actually influenced how they coped.
So it's not just about the pain itself, but the story you build around it. That's incredible. It makes me think about the power of reframing difficult experiences.
Exactly. And that's one of the key takeaways from narrative psychology. By understanding the stories we tell ourselves, we can potentially rewrite them in ways that empower us.
So it's like we're all the authors of our own lives, and narrative psychology gives us the tools to edit and revise our personal narratives.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that we have more agency than we sometimes realize in shaping our own experiences.
This is already making me rethink how I tell my own stories. Now, I'm sure some people might still be skeptical about qualitative research. They might think it's too subjective, lacking rigor, or not generalizable. How do you address those concerns?
It's true that qualitative research might not fit the traditional image of science, with test tubes and equations. But that doesn't mean it lacks rigor. Qualitative researchers are very careful about documenting their methods, acknowledging their own biases, and using established techniques to analyze data.
So it's not just a free-for-all of opinions and interpretations. There's a systematic approach behind it.
Absolutely. And while it's true that qualitative research often involves smaller samples than quantitative studies, the goal isn't always to make grand sweeping generalizations.
Right.
The insights gained from studying a specific group or phenomenon can still be incredibly valuable, even if they don't apply to every single person.
It's like saying just because a novel tells the story of a particular character doesn't mean we can't learn something universal about human nature from it.
Exactly. Qualitative research is about delving into the richness of human experience, even if that means focusing on a specific context or population. It's about understanding the nuances, the complexities, the things that make us uniquely human.
This is making me realize that qualitative research is all around us, even if we don't always recognize it. It's in the way we interpret a piece of art, the way we understand a historical event, even the way we analyze our own dreams.
You're absolutely right. It's a way of seeing the world, a way of asking questions, a way of constantly seeking deeper meaning.
And on that note, let's dive into how this all actually plays out in the research process. How do researchers go about gathering and analyzing all this rich qualitative data?
Well, it's a bit like being a detective. Choosing the right tools for the case. You wouldn't use a fingerprint kit to analyze handwriting.
Right.
In qualitative research, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. It really depends on what you're trying to understand, who you're studying, and the kind of overall angle of the research.
So what are some of the tools in this qualitative detectives toolkit?
Well, some common methods are in-depth interviews, where you really get to explore someone's personal story and perspective. Then there are focus groups, where you see how people bounce ideas off each other and construct meaning as a group. And of course, there's participant observation.
Participant observation, that sounds almost like anthropological research.
Yeah.
Is that where the researcher actually immerses themselves in a particular environment or community?
Exactly. It's about getting up close and personal with the phenomenon you're studying, seeing how people behave in their natural habitat, not just how they say they behave in a controlled setting.
Like going undercover to understand a subculture.
Well, maybe not quite undercover, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
It's incredibly valuable for understanding social dynamics and cultural practices.
Okay, so let's say you've done all this fascinating field work. You've got stacks of interview transcripts, field notes, maybe even recordings of people interacting. How do you even begin to make sense of all that data?
That's where the real art of qualitative research comes in the analysis. It's not about crunching numbers or running statistical tests. It's more about identifying patterns, themes, and meanings within the data. It can be a very iterative process, like piecing together a complex puzzle.
So how do you find those pieces? Are there specific techniques for analyzing qualitative data?
Absolutely. One common technique is called coding. Imagine highlighting different passages in a book with different colored markers, each color representing a different theme or idea. Coding is a bit like that, except you're creating your own codes or categories to organize and make sense of the data.
So it's a way of breaking down this massive amount of information into manageable chunks.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And as you're going through the data, you're also constantly reflecting on what you're seeing, jotting down your thoughts and interpretations. This process is called memoing, and it's crucial for capturing those aha moments and tracking your evolving understanding.
It's like having a conversation with yourself about the data, trying to figure out what it all means.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And then there's constant comparison.
Yeah.
This involves going back and forth between different pieces of data, looking for similarities and differences, refining your categories, and building a coherent picture of what's going on.
It sounds like a very active and creative process, not just passively reading through transcripts.
It absolutely is. Qualitative research requires a certain mindset, being open to new ideas, challenging assumptions, and letting the data lead you to insights you might not have anticipated.
All this sounds incredibly valuable, but are there any limitations to qualitative research? What are some of the criticisms you hear?
Well, one common critique is that qualitative findings can be difficult to generalize to larger populations.
Yeah.
Because qualitative studies often involve small, specific samples, their findings might not be representative of everyone.
That makes sense. You're trading breadth for depth, gaining deep insights into a particular group or phenomenon, but potentially sacrificing the ability to apply those findings universally.
Right. Another critique is that qualitative research can be very time-consuming and resource-intensive. Collecting and analyzing qualitative data takes time, patience, and a deep commitment to understanding the nuances of human experience.
So it's not something you can just rush through. It requires a certain passion and dedication.
Definitely. Qualitative research is a craft, An art form, even. It's about slowing down, paying attention to the details, and being willing to immerse yourself in the world you're studying.
This all sounds incredibly insightful, but I'm wondering, for someone who's not a researcher, why should they care about qualitative research? How can this knowledge be applied in everyday life?
That's a great question. One of the most important things qualitative research can teach us is how to see the world through different lenses. It helps us understand that there's no single objective truth, that everyone experiences the world in their own unique way.
So it's about developing empathy, understanding where people are coming from, even if their perspective is different from ours.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the power of individual stories, even if those stories don't fit neatly into statistical categories. And it can make us more critical consumers of information. In a world of fake news and spin, being able to analyze how language is used to persuade or manipulate is more important than ever.
So it's not just about understanding people, but also about understanding how information is used and misused. It's about developing our critical thinking skills.
Absolutely. And on a personal level, understanding the power of narrative can help us to examine the stories we're telling ourselves about our past, our present, our future. Are these stories empowering us, or are they holding us back?
Wow, that's powerful. It's like realizing that we have the ability to rewrite the script of our own lives.
Precisely. Qualitative research gives us the tools to become more aware of those internal narratives and to challenge them if they're no longer serving us.
This has been a truly eye-opening conversation. I'm feeling inspired to start paying more attention to the qualitative aspects of my own life and the world around me.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, we've only just scratched the surface of what qualitative research has to offer. There's a whole world of fascinating methods and applications out there waiting to be explored.
And speaking of exploration, let's go back to that intriguing idea of narrative analysis. You mentioned earlier how it can help us understand the stories we tell ourselves. Can you give us a concrete example of how this plays out in research?
Absolutely. Let's revisit the example from the book about people coping with chronic pain. What researchers discovered was fascinating. It wasn't just about the level of pain people experienced, but the way they framed that pain in their personal stories.
So two people could have the same level of pain, but experience it completely differently based on the story they're telling themselves about it.
Exactly. Those who told stories of resilience, seeing their pain as a challenge to overcome or a source of strength, tended to cope much better than those who told stories of despair and defeat. It was the narrative that made the difference.
That's incredible. It really highlights how our thoughts and beliefs can have a tangible impact on our physical and emotional well-being.
And it points to the potential of narrative therapy, where therapists help people to reframe their stories in more empowering ways.
So it's not just about changing the story, but changing the way we relate to the story.
Precisely. It's about finding meaning, the purpose, even humor in the midst of difficult experiences.
This is making me realize how much power we have to shape our own realities through the stories we tell ourselves.
And the stories we share with others. Think about the impact of a single story on a community, a nation. Even the world's stories have the power to inspire, to heal, to create change.
This is blowing my mind. I'm starting to see qualitative research everywhere now, not just in academic journals, but in the way we understand art history, the current events, even our own personal lives.
And that's the beauty of it, a way of thinking, a way of being in the world, a way of constantly seeking deeper meaning and understanding.
Well, you've certainly ignited my curiosity about qualitative research. Before we wrap up, I want to circle back to that idea of qualitative and quantitative research being complementary, not competing approaches. How do you see those two worlds coming together?
It's like having two different lenses on a camera,
Each one bringing something unique into focus.
right? Quantitative research gives us that wide-angle view, those big-picture trends and patterns. But qualitative research lets us zoom in on the details, the individual stories and experiences that really make up that bigger picture.
So it's not about choosing one over the other. It's about using them together to create a more, complete and nuanced understanding.
Absolutely. When we combine those statistical insights with the richness of qualitative data, we get a much more holistic view of human behavior.
This is making me think about all the different ways we encounter qualitative research in our daily lives without even realizing it. From reading a news article that features personal interviews to watching a documentary that immerses us in a different culture.
Exactly. We're constantly absorbing qualitative information. It's all around us, shaping our understanding of the world.
And speaking of shaping our understanding, I want to bring it back to you, our listener, because ultimately all this knowledge is most powerful when it's understood and applied. So what does this all mean for you? Why should you care about qualitative research?
Well, for one thing, it can help you become a more astute observer of human behavior. You'll start to notice those subtle cues in conversations, the stories people tell themselves, the ways they interact with their environment. It's like developing a whole new set of lenses for viewing the world.
So it's not just about understanding academic research, it's about applying those insights to your own life.
Exactly. It can make you a more empathetic friend, a more insightful colleague, even a more informed citizen.
And I think it can also make us more mindful of our own internal narratives, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of.
Absolutely. We've talked about the power of narrative and how it can shape our experiences. By becoming aware of those stories, we can start to challenge the ones that are holding us back and embrace the ones that empower us.
This has been a truly mind-expanding deep dive.
Yep.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the power of qualitative research and how it can help us understand ourselves and the world around us.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore in this fascinating field.
If you're feeling inspired to learn more, I highly recommend checking out the full book, Qualitative Research in Psychology. It's a treasure trove of insights and methodologies.
And on that note, I'd like to leave you with a challenge. How can you use the principles of qualitative research to better understand your own life, your relationships, your work? Start paying attention to the stories you tell yourself and others. Look for those subtle cues in communication. And most importantly, never stop asking why.
That's a great challenge to take with us as we continue our own journeys of discovery. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of qualitative research. We'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.